Imagine this. What if you had to spend an entire year in a place where there isn't a single human being besides you? No voices, no companionship, just you and an endless, suffocating silence all around. But what if every night, along with the dark waves of the ocean, something else started washing up on the shore? Something that isn't human, but is definitely a dangerous predator. Today's story is about David, a fearless weather expert who thought he came here just to collect data but had no idea he'd end up fighting for his life. Stay till the end, because the twist coming your way will leave you stunned. The story begins in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, where a research ship slices through the deep blue waters. On board is David, a meteorologist who's exceptionally skilled at reading nature's changing moods. The government has assigned him to a remote island, one that's almost completely cut off from the world. His task was simple, but far from easy. An entire year, living alone, recording every storm, every shift in the wind, and every change in the weather. He had enough food and essential equipment, but what he didn't have was human presence. Even then, David wasn't afraid. In fact, he was excited, thinking about the reward waiting for him at the end of this mission. Just 1 year of hard work, and his life would be set. But as the ship moved closer to the island, the atmosphere began to change. From a distance, the island looked calm, almost peaceful, but as they approached, an unsettling feeling started creeping in. There were only 2 structures there, an old, decaying lighthouse and a broken-down cabin. This was where David had to spend the next year. According to protocol, he was supposed to be greeted by Robert, the weather expert who had been stationed there for the past year. But when the team landed, there was no sign of Robert. The scene inside the cabin left everyone shocked. Everything was scattered, as if someone had been desperately searching for something, or as if something terrible had happened there. The silence was so deep, even the sound of their own breathing felt unsettling. Their search for Robert led them to the lighthouse. But what they saw there made them stop in their tracks. The lighthouse door wasn't normal. It had been barricaded from all sides with sharp wooden stakes and heavy objects, as if someone inside was trying to protect themselves from something outside. When they finally broke the door open, they found Groner, a strange man with fear in his eyes and a dark secret hidden behind them. When asked about Robert, he replied coldly, "He's dead, the ocean swallowed him, and he's never coming back." The captain didn't believe him. He could sense it. Something was very wrong on this island. He gave David one last chance. "If you want, you can still come back with me." But David stood firm on his decision. In the end, the captain handed him a gun, and the ship slowly disappeared into the horizon. Now, David was truly alone. Or maybe he wasn't. Night began to fall. David was setting up the cabin when he found an old diary. It belonged to Robert. As he started flipping through the pages, his heartbeat quickened, because instead of weather data, it was filled with accounts of strange, unexplainable events happening on the island. There were sketches, too, of creatures that didn't look human at all. Twisted limbs, terrifying eyes, and faces that could haunt anyone. Robert had written a lot about these mysterious creatures, but every entry felt incomplete, as if he wanted to reveal something, but couldn't. David tried to rationalize it. Maybe this is just the effect of isolation. Maybe Robert lost his mind. But was it really just the imagination of a broken man? Or was it the truth that only reveals itself after dark? A truth David was about to face. The fear was no longer just a feeling. It was about to reveal its true form. The diary in David's hands didn't just contain terrifying sketches. There was also a photograph of a woman, maybe Robert's wife. There was something strange in her eyes, a sense of waiting, as if she was waiting for someone who would never return. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight touched the deserted island, David stepped out to begin his work. He thought he was here to collect weather data, but he had no idea he was about to find signs of death. As he reached the shore, his eyes fell on the rocks. Some stones were arranged in a strange pattern, and seashells were placed between them. This wasn't random. It looked like a ritual, an ancient, disturbing ritual. David assumed maybe Groner had done this to cope with the loneliness, but the truth was far more dangerous. Then, as he lifted his binoculars and looked toward the lighthouse, his breath stopped. Beside Groner, he saw another shadow, a blurred figure. But when he looked again, there was nothing there, just emptiness. David tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'm just tired, and he ignored it. That was the beginning of his end. Night fell, and once again, silence took over. But this time, it broke. Knock, knock, knock. Someone was at the cabin door. David thought it must be Groner. He called out, but in response, all he heard was a cold whisper. His heartbeat quickened. David picked up a lantern and slowly moved toward the door. And then, through the gap beneath the door, a hand tried to force its way inside. That hand was not human. Its fingers were long, twisted, and its nails sharp like daggers. Now it was clear he was not alone. To save himself, David ran straight to the basement. There was a small hole there, just enough to look outside. And outside, that thing was searching for him. The moment it sensed his presence, it attacked. This was his last chance. David grabbed a knife nearby, and with all his strength, he drove it straight into the creature's eye. A scream echoed through the darkness, the kind that freezes your blood. And in the next moment, it vanished into the night. Morning came. The marks in the sand told the story of that night. Strange, terrifying footprints, leading straight back to the ocean. Now David understood why Groner had sealed the lighthouse like that. He ran for help toward the lighthouse, but Groner didn't open the door. Instead, he poured water down from above and shouted, "Staying here is the biggest mistake of your life." Now David had only one option: fight. He returned to his cabin and turned it into a fortress. He nailed wooden planks over the windows, drove sharp stakes into the ground around it, and spread oil-soaked papers near the door, so he could create a ring of fire if needed. Then, in one corner, he found an old chest. Inside it, a gun and plenty of ammunition. Now, this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was war. Evening began to fall and the silence grew heavier than ever. David sat in a corner, gun in hand, his heartbeat louder than the ticking of a clock. Then, he glanced outside the window and froze. From the ocean waves, not one, not two, but dozens of predators were emerging, an entire swarm, moving straight toward him. Within seconds, heavy blows slammed against the door. The wood began to crack. Every Udar felt like death knocking. Now it was either him or them. Without hesitation, David pulled the trigger. Gunshots echoed across the island. Some of the creatures dropped, and for a brief moment, David thought maybe the gunfire would scare them away. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The real battle had just begun. The sound of gunfire didn't scare the creatures. It only fueled the monsters inside them. Seeing the bodies of their own kind, they grew even more violent. Now David understood. This fight wasn't going to be easy. In a desperate last attempt, he set fire to the pile of books near the door. Flames shot up, and for a moment, the predators backed away. But that move backfired on him. The fire spread so quickly that within minutes, the entire cabin turned into a burning furnace. Now there was only one way out. David wrapped himself in a wet sheet and leaped straight through the flames. Outside, there was darkness, chaos, and death lurking everywhere. Somehow, he managed to hide behind a large rock near the lighthouse. His arm was badly injured, blood dripping continuously. Then thunder roared across the sky, and within moments, heavy rain began to pour. The fire was extinguished, but everything David had turned to ashes before his eyes. Now he had only one option left: get inside the lighthouse. David gripped his rifle tightly and waited for the right moment. As soon as Groner stepped outside to collect water, David moved in behind him. But then, out of nowhere, a shadow lunged at him. That same sea creature. But this time, it didn't stand like an enemy. It stood like Groner's protector. David was about to pull the trigger when Groner shouted, "Stop! Don't shoot! It's my pet!" Hearing that, David froze. But he quickly thought on his feet. He made a deal. The life of your pet in exchange for letting me inside. Groner had no choice. David had weapons, and whatever supplies were left. Eventually, he gave in. That night, both of them sat behind the thick walls of the lighthouse. Outside, death was roaming. Inside, there was an eerie silence. The next morning, David woke up, and what he saw left him stunned. That same creature was sitting calmly and slowly, licking the wound on his arm. David pulled his hand back instantly and removed the bandage, and what he saw changed everything. The wound was completely healed, as if it had never been there at all. Now David's scientific mind kicked in. He thought, if the world finds out about this creature's healing ability, we could become rich overnight. But Groner had something very different in mind. For him, this island wasn't a prison. It was his kingdom. In the middle of their conversation, he revealed a truth. That changed everything. Years ago, this creature had been caught in a fishing net. Groner saved it, but what he did afterward was a stain on humanity. He didn't become its savior, he became its master. He tortured it, broke it, and eventually turned it into his slave. And the biggest truth, every night, the army that rises from the ocean isn't coming to attack. They're coming to rescue, to free their companion from Groner's control. But against Groner's guns, they lose every single time. Hearing this, the ground beneath David felt like it vanished. Now he understood. He wasn't just trapped alone. He wasn't with a man. He was trapped with a monster. Evening fell again, and fear returned to the island. Groner picked up his gun and told David to get ready. They looked toward the ocean. Hundreds of eyes glowed in the darkness. This time, their numbers were far greater than before. The lighthouse was no longer a shelter. It had become a battlefield. Groner fired like a madman. Every bullet, every scream, every second only made the terror worse. David was breaking down. Fear, exhaustion, and the weight of the truth, all together, were crushing him. And finally, he collapsed unconscious. All night long, the sound of gunfire and the painful cries of those creatures echoed against the lighthouse walls. And Groner, alone, fought through that storm of death. To protect his madness, and his cruelty. Now only one question remained. Would David live to see the next morning? With the first ray of sunlight, for a moment, it felt like maybe everything would be okay. But relief wasn't written in David's fate, only suffering was. Suddenly, a bucket of ice-cold water was thrown over him. David jolted awake. Groner stood in front of him, that same ruthless coldness in his eyes. He said bluntly, "If you want to stay alive in this hell, learn to stain your guns with the blood of these beasts, or this lighthouse will be closed to you forever." David had no choice. He was no longer free. He had become Groner's slave. During the day, he turned the lighthouse mechanism, and at night, he fought death. But what hurt him the most was watching that voiceless female creature. Groner wasn't human, he was a monster. Every single day, he inflicted horrors on that creature, enough to make anyone's soul tremble. One night, when the attack began, Groner lowered his gun and stood at a distance, watching, like it was entertainment. He wanted David to become just like him, a ruthless hunter. That night, something changed. The fear inside David slowly disappeared, and then he just kept firing, relentlessly, without stopping until morning came. The sun rose, and on the lighthouse steps sat David, covered in blood, exhausted, but no longer the same. He had learned how to kill, time passed, and that deserted island became an open prison for him. And then, something strange happened. Between that female creature and David, a silent bond began to form. He gave her a name, Annarisa. She was trapped between Groner's cruelty and David's growing compassion. Winter began to set in, and the attacks slowly started to decrease. David thought maybe it was ending. Maybe the creatures had given up. But Groner knew better. He said, "This silence is the calm before the storm. They'll return, and this time, stronger than ever." One evening, to break the silence, they started playing chess, slowly. They got so absorbed in the game, they lost track of time. And their biggest mistake, they forgot to turn on the lighthouse beacon. Darkness, and the perfect opportunity the creatures had been waiting for. Suddenly, their numbers weren't in the hundreds, but in the thousands. Ammunition started running low, and both of them, retreating step by step, got trapped on the top floor of the lighthouse. In the middle of the fight, Groner's leg was badly injured. Death was only a few steps away. Then, the first light of dawn broke. The warmth of the sun was poison to those creatures. One by one, they retreated back into the ocean. Today, they had survived. But at what cost? Now there was nothing left. No food, no ammunition. And hope, that was nearly gone too. Then, one afternoon, David looked out at the ocean. Far away, between the waves, a faint shadow, a ship. His breathing quickened. This was his chance, his freedom. He ran like a madman to grab the flare gun. But Groner stepped in his way, blocking his path. He said, "You're not going anywhere. This island is mine." He had begun to see himself as the king of this hell, and David as his prisoner. Then, suddenly, Annarisa attacked Groner. Maybe she wanted to save David, or maybe she wanted her own freedom. But in that struggle, those precious seconds were lost. David reached outside, but it was too late. The ship had already disappeared beyond the horizon. David just stood there, helpless, broken. His last hope had sunk into the ocean. Now, only one question remained. Would he ever make it out of this place alive? Or would he too become just another forgotten part of this island's dark history? Time kept passing, but on this cursed island, nothing changed. Crossed every limit. And for David, watching Annarisa suffer day after day was becoming unbearable. One day, David carved fish bones and made a small boat. Just a toy. When he gave it to Annarisa, for the first time, there was a faint spark in her eyes. The very next moment, she grabbed David's hand and led him to a hidden corner of the island. And there, what he saw was nothing short of a miracle. An old, real boat. David's hope came back to life. When he asked Groner about it, another horrifying truth surfaced. Years ago, some travelers had reached this island, barely escaping with their lives. But before morning came, those sea predators wiped them out. Their ship, loaded with weapons and ammunition, still lies buried in the depths of this ocean. That was all David needed to hear. He had found a way. He pulled out an old diving suit and made a decision. He would go underwater and recover that ammunition. Groner hesitated at first, but then a dangerous thought crossed his mind. He had already noticed something was changing between David and Annarisa, and he decided this was his chance to get rid of David forever. According to the plan, Groner took him to the exact spot where the ship had sunk. David wore the heavy diving suit and descended into the depths. Down there, everything was silent. And then he saw it, the wrecked ship, broken but still ominous. After searching for a while, he found several crates of dynamite. But then, something moved in the darkness. Figures slowly began approaching him. David froze. In that heavy suit, he couldn't even move properly. Above, sitting in the boat, Groner understood everything. With a smile, he thought, he's not coming back. And he left him there to die while dreaming of ruling his kingdom. But fate wasn't done yet. Those weren't the deadly predators. They were their young. David gathered his courage, removed the suit, and somehow swam back to the surface. He survived, and in his hands, he now carried death itself. As soon as he returned, he placed dynamite all around the lighthouse. A trap. One final move. Months passed, and winter arrived. Snow began to fall on the island. Silence spread everywhere, but this peace wasn't real. It was the calm before the storm. This time, David made a decision. He wouldn't wait. He would attack. He told Annarisa, "Go to the top and scream with all your strength." Annarisa's painful cry tore through the silence of the night. And then the ocean awakened. The waves began to rise, and from the darkness, they started emerging. They thought their companion was in danger, and they rushed toward the lighthouse, like maniacs. The door was already open, a trap they were walking into on their own. Wave after wave, they entered inside. David, risking his life, kept them distracted. When the entire swarm was inside, Groner, with a mad laugh, pulled the dynamite lever. Both of them held their breath. Now, all that remained was the explosion. But nothing happened, no sound, no spark, just silence. And then, slowly, death started climbing the stairs. Standing before them was vengeance, buried for years. Now, no explosives would help. No gun would matter. Now, the only thing that could save them was luck. Silence, so deep, you could hear death approaching. The lever had been pulled, but there was no explosion. In that one moment, David realized his biggest mistake. The connection was broken. When death stands right in front of you, you only have two choices: give up or make the impossible possible. David chose the second. He ran like a madman, trying to reconnect the broken wires. Outside, Groner stood alone, holding back those countless predators, climbing the walls of the lighthouse. Every second, death was getting closer. And then, the moment David fixed the wires, the ground beneath the island trembled. One, then another, two massive explosions erupted. The darkness of the night turned into daylight in an instant. The blast was so powerful that both David and Groner collapsed unconscious. The next morning, as the fog cleared, what lay before them was horrifying. Bodies scattered everywhere. Those monsters they had thought were enemies. And Groner was no longer human. He was going from one wounded creature to another, finishing them off. Then David's eyes fell on a dying creature. Around its neck was a small locket. In that moment, everything changed. David's heart sank. These weren't monsters. They could feel too. Their screams weren't violence, they were pain. They hadn't come to attack. They had come to save their own. Right before David's eyes, the truth was finally clear. And with that truth came crushing guilt. Without realizing it, he had taken countless innocent lives. Months passed, the attacks had stopped, but from the shore, soft cries could still be heard. David tried to make peace. He built a circle of stones and placed inside it that small boat, the one he had made for Annarisa, a symbol of hope. Maybe she would return. Around that time, David found some old photographs of Groner. The moment he looked at one, he froze. In the picture was the same woman he had seen in Robert's diary, and standing beside her was none other than Groner himself. The truth was finally revealed. Groner was Robert. He had changed his identity so he could remain on this island as its eternal ruler. He never intended to leave. One evening, when David reached the shore, he noticed something strange. Inside the circle of stones, the small boat was gone. In its place stood a tiny sea creature. In its little hands was that same boat. Slowly, David extinguished his burning torch and threw it away. It was a signal, a sign of peace. He wanted to show he didn't want to fight anymore. And then the ocean stirred. From the waves, Annarisa emerged, and behind her, her entire kind. This time, there was no anger in their eyes, only hope. Hope for a safe place. They wanted peace. But in every story, there's always one person who cannot understand peace. Groner. He arrived with a gun, shouting furiously. For him, power meant only one thing: fear. He ordered Annarisa, "Go back to your cage." But this time, something had changed. Annarisa didn't stop. For the first time, she ignored him. The chains of slavery were finally broken. She looked straight into his eyes, and without saying a word, said everything. She was no longer his puppet. And with that, the final battle had begun, between hatred and compassion. Now the question remained, who would win? Standing among her own kind, there was no fear left in Annarisa's eyes. She was strong, capable, seeing her free. The ground beneath Groner seemed to collapse. The slave he had crushed for years was now challenging his entire kingdom. The feeling of defeat, of humiliation, pushed Groner into a madness, where a man stops being human. And the price of that madness was about to be paid by an innocent life. Burning with rage, Groner ran straight toward the lighthouse. For a moment, David thought maybe he had realized his mistake, but the truth was far more terrifying. Groner grabbed his signal gun and without hesitation fired a burning flare straight at a small creature standing on the shore. That innocent being didn't even understand what was happening, and within seconds, it was consumed by flames. The silence that once felt like peace turned into screams. In Annarisa's eyes, whatever little sympathy remained for David shattered. She believed he was part of this betrayal too, and all of it happened right in front of him. Seeing this, David's blood boiled. Now this wasn't just a fight, it was a judgment. Who was human and who was the monster? He ran with everything he had toward the lighthouse. On the rooftop, they stood face to face, and then the final brutal clash began. Groner had lost all control. He grabbed an iron rod and was about to crush David's skull, when suddenly David shouted, "Stop, Robert!" That name stopped everything. Groner froze. After years, someone had called him by his real name, Robert. He wasn't born a monster. He was once a simple weather officer, broken by his wife's death and the crushing isolation of this island. Depression, loneliness, and the hunger to feel powerful. All of it turned him into something else. Now, for the first time, he saw himself for what he truly was. He realized these creatures were never the enemy. They were only fighting for their freedom. And he had become their greatest enemy. The weight of guilt broke him from within. And then he made a decision to pay for his sins. Slowly, he walked toward the creatures. Without any weapon, without any fear. And in the next moment, those guardians of the sea brought the darkest chapter of that story to an end. Time passed. Exactly 1 year later, that same government ship returned to the island. The same captain and a new weather expert. The lighthouse door opened, and standing there was David. But he wasn't the same. There was no light left in his eyes. Only a deep, endless silence. The captain asked, "What happened to the previous officer? And are you ready to come back?" After a moment of silence, David replied softly, "David is dead." The captain didn't understand, and eventually, the ship sailed away. The truth was, this island never lets anyone leave. David had become the very thing he once hated. The new Robert, the new Groner, the new keeper of this desolate kingdom. Far out in the ocean, Annarisa with her kind was finally free. And standing on the shore, David simply watched her go. She had found her freedom. But he had become a permanent part of that silence. Sometimes humans are far more dangerous than beasts. Now tell me, should David have left that island? Or did he make the right choice? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. And if you want more stories like this, stay tuned.